All right, everyone, we're going to start Unit 5. This will kind of be a rehash for those of you who are in class today. This will be somewhat of a rehash of what we talked about, at least the first 4 or 5 slides. But I'm going to go ahead and go over go over this again because there were 5 or 6 who were not in class today, or maybe 4. But either way, there's enough good stuff in early on that I don't mind going over it. This is only going to be about a 20-minute video because of the way things are running today. But we're going to go ahead and get started. I am going to post the PowerPoint online. This is just one that I borrowed from a guy named Nathan Scott Bruins. He was in one of my principal classes, he was in the cohort behind me at Asbury, but he gave me access to all his stuff, and this is his PowerPoint. And it's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This unit that we're going to be talking about is consciousness. And this is sort of a dirty definition. And by dirty, I just mean it's not super clear on what consciousness is because, well, essentially, psychologists are still wondering or are still learning about what consciousness actually is. But the quick and dirty definition is right here. The process underlying the mental model we create of the world of which we are aware. So this is essentially us taking everything from last unit with sensation and perception, and that helps us sort of create a model of the world in our minds. And then we exist based on that model. You know, all of our, everything we do, everything we think, everything we react to, how we react are all part of that consciousness. However, that's not it, because just because we create a mental model does not necessarily mean is not all of the consciousness definition. There's another part here. This is the part of the mind that we can retrieve a fact, an idea, or create an idea. We can think of an emotion or do an emotion or a memory, or combine it with critical thinking. So it's also sort of the internal part of our mind as well. One thing I hit on a lot in the class portion was this word right here, aware. I'm kind of separating these two. I'm going to go back and talk about this for a minute. Awareness is key. All right, that is, you have to be aware to be what's considered conscious. You got to be aware of where you are, what you're doing, who you're with. If you are not aware, you are considered to be unconscious. Not to be confused with non-conscious, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but unconscious. So consciousness is another word. I would say aware. Being aware is very important. Circle this, highlight it, put little dots by it, whatever. But awareness and consciousness are very similar. You can't be conscious without being aware, I don't believe. All right, so now moving on down here. But it's not it. Our ability to think, our ability to act, our ability to remember, those are all conscious processes. So there's sort of 2 parts to it. There's the what we do with the stimulus part that we get, the environmental stimuli, but there's also what do we do with that in our as we talked about last unit with perception. That perception is actually part of our consciousness. And so the big challenge in psychology is how do we prove that we have consciousness? Because remember, psychology is science-based. It's based on numbers. It's based on observation. It's based on the scientific method, all those things, case studies. Well, consciousness is hard to quantify. It's hard to put numbers to it. And so that's sort of the problem. It is very, as it says right here, subjective and elusive. All right, what some person might seem as being conscious, others may not, depending on how they are reading the different things. Think about people who are in comas. they don't seem to be aware of their environment. They may not respond to stimuli at all. But some people, when they come out of consciousness, or I'm sorry, when they come out of comas, will say, well, I remember the doctor saying this. Were they conscious? Unconscious? It's a big challenge that psychologists are still trying to wrap their head around. So this is a little bit of history. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is kind of how we got into consciousness again. In the 60s, of course, the 60s, peace, make love, not war type thing. Psychologists began to question the behaviorist model for two reasons. We've talked about the behaviorist model. First, there were psychological issues which needed better explanation than behaviorism could offer. Quirks of memory. Why do you remember one thing but not another? Why is smell so linked to memory? Things like that. Perceptual illusions, which we kind of went over at the end of the last unit. Drug-induced states. Remember, this is the 60s. So you got people taking pills. You got people eating mushrooms and snorting all kinds of other stuff. Smoking the wacky weed and all that stuff. So this, the drug-induced states of consciousness was of particular interest to psychologists, and the behaviorist model didn't really explain those very well. And so the mind sort of came to the forefront again in psychology. And then the other thing that's happened, and this is even within the past 20 or 30 years, is that now we've got better tools in order to see what's going on in the brain. Especially in ways that Watson never even thought about. He did not. There's no way he could have thought that we could take a picture of your brain working when you hear words versus when you see words. When you hear words, like what you're doing right now, the auditory system is going off here in your temporal lobe. All right, but as opposed to when you see the words, like what's on this right here, your occipital lobe, your visual cortex in your occipital lobe is lighting up. So we can actually see your brain light up as your consciousness changes and as your conscious experience changes. But remember I talked about there is a difference between unconscious, which is not being conscious, and non-conscious. Non-conscious and conscious are two different things. All right. The non-conscious mind is great at multitasking. It can do many things at once. Again, and it's really without you even thinking about it, without you being conscious of it. However, our conscious mind only has the ability to focus on one thing at a time. All right. It has to look at things serially, or think of it in a series, one right after another. All right. Think of a Christmas tree or Christmas lights. A lot of older ones, you unplug one, since it's in a series, the electricity stops at that point, and the whole thing goes out. You've stopped the circuit. All right. So let's see. Think of a series circuit, or a serial box, or not serial box, different kind of serial, serial number. But the whole idea is that our conscious mind can only do one thing at a time. We can only focus on this PowerPoint or these notes at this time. All right. One thing at a time. The unconscious mind can handle all kinds of different information at the same time. And this is what is known as parallel processing. An example of that is walking, chewing gum, and breathing. Now, these also might be, you may be thinking, well, wait, no, those are all autonomic system functions. Well, you're right. What you're going to find is as we get further and further into the course, some of these processes and some of these ideas are going to come back time and time again. All right. So, but yes, these are also sort of autonomic processes, things our bodies can do without thinking about them. Same thing here. All right, those the mind people, I guess you could say, see that as, or call that, the non-conscious process, or the non-conscious mind. So what does our consciousness do? It does three things. All right, the first one is that it restricts our attention. As I said in the last slide, we can only focus on one thing at a time. Think about what it would be like if our minds were all, or if our brains were all trying to process a whole bunch of different things and all in different, that were all separated from each other. It would be difficult to make sense of the world because you've got a lot of things in our brains doing different things and giving us different perceptions. What consciousness does is this helps us from being overwhelmed by the stimulation. And again, because we can only think of things one at a time or notice one thing at a time, we have what is known as selective attention. Okay, selective attention. That's our ability to only focus on one thing at the same time. And this is one of the reasons why, remember one of the questions we missed, a whole bunch of us missed in the last test? I'm going to revisit that question about the teen driver and the cell phones because I think the answer actually is selective attention, but I don't remember going over that. So that may have been mislabeled in my index. I found another one that was mislabeled, but that's beside the point. But anyways, selective attention is our consciousness restriction of our attention and what we're paying attention to around us. We can only pay attention to one thing at a time. Number two, consciousness provides us with a mental meeting place. It's sort of a way to take our sensations that we're being given from the world and sort of combining them with memory, emotions, and motives. And how this happens is literally called the binding problem. How does the stimulation from our environment coincide with memory, with emotions, and with motives? Why is it when it's hot, people have a tendency to get more angry? Or why does that smell remind you of your great-grandmother? Or things like that, or going to her house. I think the one I used in class was soup beans. I love the smell of soup beans because I get taken back to my mama's house when I was young. So, but that is the binding problem. And then the third thing that it does is that it allows us to create a mental model of the world that we can manipulate. And this is what this means. We are, unlike other organisms, we are not prisoners of the moment. We do not act reflexively to stimulation. What that means is we don't just have reflexes. All right, we can also think for ourselves. We can also think of different outcomes. We have the ability to set goals. And this is kind of the one thing that separates us from everything else on the planet. But we can manipulate. We have a model of the world, and we can think. We have the ability to think of ways to manipulate that to change it, and that is what our consciousness does. Now, of course, to me, that begs a question. Well, animals that can't do that, are they unconscious? So, even some of these, think of a deer. We've all seen deer out in the woods. What Psych says is what makes humans different is our ability to, when we hear a loud boom, is that another hunter? Is that somebody shooting at me? Is that a plane crash? What is that? For something like a white-tailed deer, they hear the boom, they react as if something is going to get them. That is just a reflex, and they're gone. There is no thinking about it. Conscious mind can take on a variety of roles, but it must, again, focus sequentially on one thing and one thing only, and then it moves on to the next one. Multitasking is not all it is cracked up to be. Think about hands-free driving devices. I've got one in my truck, and I use it every day. I call Kara when I'm on my way home. Am I actually able to drive and be on the phone at the same time? There's research out there that suggests no, that when I'm consciously talking to my wife, I am not paying attention to the road. So there are levels. Now let's talk about the non-conscious line. There are two levels of the non-conscious or subconscious mind. preconscious and unconscious. All right. So preconscious memories is information that is not currently conscious but can be recalled voluntarily. So I want to think about my first hunting trip. All right. I was not thinking about it at the time, but I can voluntarily pull that up. So that is a preconscious memory. The first time I killed a squirrel. I remember where it was. I remember the gun I was using, and I even remember the tree that it was on because it is still there. So that is the preconscious memories. The next one is, of course, unconscious. That is cognition or thought without awareness. Remember we talked about how awareness or being aware of what's around you or what's going on is important in consciousness. When you are unconscious, you still have cognition or thought, but it is without awareness of what's going on. This involves levels of brain systems that range from autopilot to those which can have subtle influences on consciousness and behavior. And we're going to get into that. Daydreaming. Maddie in class, I kind of caught her daydreaming a little bit and used her as an example. She was on sort of an autopilot. There are some that might suggest that she was actually unconscious because she was not aware of what was going on until I spoke to her, which brought her back to what was going on. So, and I'm, don't mean to be picking on Maddie because she was just the one that was right in front of me. I think I saw a couple other trying to zone out as well. But again, there's questions there. So what is unconsciousness? The dictionary might define a term as being a loss or of all consciousness, like when a person faints. But psychology, it is different. I want to make sure we are aware of these differences, conscious of the differences. And yes, that was a dad joke. Fill in the blanks to complete the word below. What is it? All right. I've seen this, but when the first time I saw it, I figured it would be define. All right, using a technique called priming, psychologists can have some influence on people and behavior. This idea of priming is similar to asking leading questions in court or framing questions by asking them in a way which increases the likelihood of certain answers. We talked a little bit about this in the last unit. I know there's a question or two on the test. But again, you're seeing things sort of come back around. All right. There was a number of possible answers to choose from. For example, defend, defeat, defect, defile, deform, defray, diffuse, and of course define, which is probably what most of you chose. Why? Because we used it up here, we used it here, and that's kind of what we're talking about. All right, so most of you probably first thought define because you were primed or framed to do so. So that's all I'm going to get with today, at least with this video. I'm probably going to make another one tonight. No, I won't tonight because we got a middle school football game. So, but I might get around to it before we leave. But we're gonna get into Freud and his view of consciousness and his ego, superego, and id, and all that stuff. So, anyways, hope you all have a good day, and we will see you all next time around. Peace.